Well, as Donald Trump angrily announced more tariffs against India earlier this month, reports emerged from New Delhi that Prime Minister Narendra Modi would be making his first visit to China in 7 years and meet with President Xi Jinping. So are Trump's tariffs pushing the two Asian giants closer together? Pradeep Taneja is a senior lecturer in Asian Studies at the University of Melbourne, and he joins me now. Pradeep, good to have you back on the program. Now, of course, China and India, Pradeep, have been working towards improving relations since that deadly border clash in 2020 that saw the diplomatic freeze. But are Trump's tariffs perhaps, warming the ice quicker between Beijing and New Delhi?
Girish, I think, there's a temptation to see something into this, the tensions between India and the United States over tariffs affecting relationship between India and China. But I think the relationship has its own dynamics. This is a process that started when Prime Minister Modi visited Russia, Kazan, in October last year. And he met President Xi Jinping after more than 5 years. And during that meeting, they agreed that they need to rebuild that relationship. So this is a process during which, for example, in Kazan, Prime Minister Modi said to President Xi Jinping that India supports China's chairmanship of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization this year, that India would offer full support to China's presidency of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So I think the developments we've seen over the last 9 months are, they have their own momentum, their own dynamics. It is possible that the current sort of situation where India has a rather tense relationship with the United States, China too is facing a lot of pressure from the United States. It is possible that it has created a slightly better environment for this, for example, the visit to India by the foreign minister of China, Wang Yi, this week, that the overall atmospherics have improved. But in terms of substance, I think India-China relationship has its own momentum.
Yes, and speaking of momentum, the Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi, he is in India at the moment. But in what areas can India and China work together in the face of the tough talking from the Trump administration?
Well, there's not much they can do in terms of trade. India runs a huge trade deficit with China, more than $100 billion, US $100 billion. India has been trying for a very long time to try to bring down the trade deficit. India wants to be able to export more of its products to China. But the way the industrial structures of the two countries are, that it's been very difficult, because most of what India imports from China is electronics, industrial inputs, heavy machinery. For example, one of the machines that India imports from China is the tunnel drilling machines. And in the last few months, China had imposed restrictions on exports of that machinery to India. And I understand that over the last 24 hours, there has been some progress. China has said that China is going to lift restrictions on delivery of these machines to India. So the dynamics is such, the trade dynamics is such that India-China trade is important, particularly, India importing many of the industrial goods from China, which are essential for India's own exports. They are key inputs within India's own exports. So India would like to reduce the trade deficit. India would like to open up the Chinese market a bit more for Indian goods. And I'm not sure much progress is going to be made in this, because China says the Chinese market is already open. So on the trade front, I don't see much sort of change, except China lifting some of the restrictions it has imposed on exports of fertilizer to India, exports of these drilling machines, and importantly, of rare earth magnets for India's, electric vehicle makers. And I understand that over the last 24 hours, the Chinese foreign minister has said that those restrictions are being lifted. So that's a good result.
Yes, but at the same time, Pradeep, one would assume India would still be wary of Beijing's moves to strengthen its position in South Asia, particularly when you talk about its relations with Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and then perhaps even the Maldives.
Indeed. I mean, China's footprint has been growing fairly rapidly in South Asia, largely because China has very deep pockets nowadays, and China has been funding all kinds of infrastructure development, even military modernization of South Asian states. In the recent clashes between India and Pakistan, for example, Chinese-made fighter jets were used by Pakistan, and also there is evidence that China provided intelligence, China provided data to Pakistani Air Force. So clearly there is very close collaboration between China and Pakistan, but also China has developed a fairly comprehensive relationship with many of India's neighbors. So those structural problems will continue. And there are clearly structural problems between the two countries. India is an emerging power, not just in South Asia, but in the Indo-Pacific more broadly. India wants to have greater influence in the region, and China sees itself as the dominant power. China wants to push United States out of the region and be the dominant power in the region. It doesn't want to share the limelight with any other power, whereas India sees itself as a legitimate power in its own region.
Yes, and on to sort of India-US matters. Now, Narendra Modi, he is not one to publicly criticize other fellow world leaders, and hasn't done so this time with Donald Trump, despite Trump chastising India, particularly for buying Russian oil and imposing those tariffs. How do you think Narendra Modi has to position himself, not just from an international platform, but also domestically, to be seen as that leader who can also stand up to Trump?
Well, the India-US relationship is a very important relationship for India. This is a relationship in which both sides have invested heavily, particularly over the last 20 years. Indian economy is very well integrated with the US economy. Indian companies have strong presence in the United States. US companies have a very strong presence in India. Defense relationship between India and United States has grown tremendously, so much so that a lot of the new equipment that India buys comes from the United States and a few other Western nations. So the relationship is very important. And Prime Minister Modi is mature enough, I think, not to abandon, not to harm this relationship, which has been built over at least 2 decades. And he realizes that President Trump is in office only for, another 3 years and a bit. But the relationship between India and the United States is far more important. Also, President Trump changes his position all the time. Although he's announced these extra 25% tariff on top of the 25% so-called reciprocal tariffs, and they're supposed to come into effect on the 27th of August. But he could change his mind again. And also, depending on what happens with these meetings between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine and other European leaders in Washington over the last 24 hours, it's possible that there could be some sort of agreement over Ukraine, the Ukraine conflict. And if that happens, the Russian oil issue may disappear.
Okay, Pradeep Taneja, we'll have to leave it there, but really appreciate your insights on all matters to do with China and India. Thank you so much.
Good to talk to you, Girish.